Thanks for watching Aquiva Keys. We're here to bring you all the actionable insights you need to know about Salesforce, the App Exchange, and beyond. Thanks again for taking a minute this morning. We've got the spring release of Salesforce coming out, which is always, I guess it's at least one of the top three most exciting Salesforce times of year, right? Maybe
Exactly, and that's the beauty that they have usually few hundred pages of documentation, and even deciding what is worth to read is a little bit challenging, right?
Yeah, so that's a great point. I mean, I guess not every Salesforce customer wants to wade through hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation.
And I have a feeling that, like, looking on what is in this documentation, sometimes you have a very important thing, sometimes very small details. So maybe let's try our audience to a little bit better navigate in this release, right?
No, no, exactly. So yeah, to get started, maybe Jakob, if you want to talk about what are the top things that have jumped out at you. What are you really interested to see, or what are you perhaps even concerned about looking at what they're releasing in spring this year?
Sure. So I think the most interesting part, it's not super sexy, but it's related to the fact that Salesforce is giving us first time opportunity to define which Apex unit tests are going to be executed during when it's needed to make a deployment to production. And I know it sounds super boring and super techy, but give me a minute. The thing is that for most of Salesforce customers, the release management is really a challenge. So we're talking about sometimes hours, sometimes like half of the day of full team doing some random actions over the weekend and then hitting some problems. It's because of the legacy amount of code on these orgs is just like super changing to make a good deployment. And with this one small change, we can make it very granular. So if we are just modifying your account trigger, and there are only three classes related to it, the deployment can be like super fast. And I think that's the most important decision. Is it worth to spend some time to go through whole unit tests and Apex classes and make improvement into release management? Probably yes, and probably that's going to be the fastest return on investment when next time the release or deployment preparation is not going to take hours but only minutes.
That's a great point. I think I've heard plenty of customers talk about how they have watched their org just spin and spin and spin for deployments or for changes they might be making. So yes, it might not be the most exciting or um, interactive feature that they're releasing, but that actually could have a really big impact. What would you do, or what would you recommend in order to determine how well suited someone's code base would be for that feature? Or even beyond that, what risk mitigation strategies should they put in place to make sure that they do catch any regressions that they need to make sure to catch?
Sure. So if your code base is well designed, so you have a small granular classes doing only one thing, most likely it's going to work for you out of the box. It is not the case because your org has a beautiful history of switching between many vendors and many people making some ad hoc actions, and you have just a monolithic, huge 40,000 lines in a single class. Then, unfortunately, that would take some efforts to probably speed it. But between you and me, anyway, sooner or later, you want to make this effort. And the main reason is that what we see with artificial intelligence, with all this vibe coding, code generation, and so on, all these things can help you save a lot on the development, but only if your code base is ready for it. If you have like this few thousand lines in a single class, any LLM won't be able to easily proceed this amount of context, which is not really necessary. So investing into reduction of tech debt sooner than later is generally a good idea.
That is a fantastic response, and you're right. I think we've got an entire team of I don't know what we call them lately, either AI experts or AI coding wizards, something along those lines. But they spend a lot of time actually writing about what you would think is a boring topic, which is how do you make code much, much cleaner? How do you make it more consumable so that you can do a better job and leverage more of the AI tools that are out there? And it's amazing how that starts to tie in issues like this.
For me, it's a little bit connected to another item from our list. The pretty big announcement is that Salesforce decided to make flow orchestration a standard flow type. So historically, it was paid add-on. It was quite expensive. Not many customers use this. And that's interesting topic to discuss because on one hand, Salesforce is a little bit locked with their pricing. So if you pay per user license, buying any extra add-ons to make development more fancy is a very techy decision and hard to justify with your investment. The fact that they are giving it now as part of their core platform for free means that if you as a Salesforce customer have lots of flaws, that can be another thing worth to consider to implement to reduce some complexity. Well, I have a little bit mixed things about this because for me, all this low code and no code was built at top of the promise that it's going to be faster than development. And like 3 years ago, that was true, but the world has changed. And maybe like even a little bit too late to think about enabling this feature because maybe you can just start thinking how you can simplify lots of things on your org, solve these problems with tech debt, improve performance, and solve some critical bugs by just moving to more Apex-driven solutions.
That may be a topic we're gonna have to hold for another time because I think we could spend an entire 30 minutes talking
Right.
about how
It's
how
a very
AI has
great.
changed, right? You know, because you're right, in the beginning, the promise of the platform was that admins could create very complex business applications. Now, you can almost do that as fast, and there's plenty of developers that can do it quickly. Um, Going back to the flow orchestration, though, how has that changed what you recommend to clients? So, you know, at one point, with there being some additional cost to it, it kind of steered you in a particular direction to solve problems. Has it changed the approaches you recommend?
That's for sure, because like Flow Orchestrator is a very elegant tool to put complex business logic, which is going beyond a single flow execution. So you have like multi-user journey when you are doing something. The orchestrator is a very nice name, and from a more technical point of view, it's like a complex state machine which allow you to put lots of logic and handle it in a more elegant way. So I would say if because of any reasons you will decide that you are going to build a new logic with flows, that's definitely something what is worth to bring to attention of your team.
Okay. So am I understanding that correctly that what this actually may allow you to do now that it's not paid is you can start to write actually smaller flows, but then use this to orchestrate them together as opposed to having to put a bunch of logic into a single flow to avoid the additional cost.
That's a good understanding. Yes.
Okay, that is fantastic. What about and that may go hand in hand with it then. So in light of that, as clients are scaling up their flow, um, whatever you might call it, the flows that they write and the amount that they use this, how would you recommend that they scale that in a well-governed, logical way?
That's a great question. And that's one of the challenges with flows that if you're using them for solving a very simple automations, they're easy to use. But from a moment that they are starting to make enterprise level solution with lots of complexities, there is not very easy answer because like what you can do with code is to review it. It's like, still a language. Okay, you must to understand the syntax, but you can easily read this. With flows, you have huge XML file, and the review of it require you to first deploy it to some environment and so on. Testing is a little bit more challenging. So honest answer is that I would literally think, is it still a good strategy to put lots of complex logic into flows in the current state of the world when like AI can literally easily generate code for you and make the review, but with flows and XMS, it's just not working out of the box.
Wow. Okay. So we really are maybe at an inflection point where the clicks versus code conversation gets to be more critical. I'll flag this as a good follow-up conversation. Are there what other features caught your attention or what other changes in the spring release caught your attention?
A little bit related to this is the fact that Salesforce is opening beta for a setup with Agentforce, which sounds like a very powerful thing to ask Agentforce, the external productions, to do something for you. The only reason is when I'm a little bit afraid of this is that usually changing things directly in a production may not be the best idea. And again, if you're just adding a field or modifying a layout, probably you would like at the end someone from your dev team make sure that in your code repository this metadata are updated. But if you will try to be very creative about changing like heavier things in your production, yeah, that's one of the features which I'm a little bit afraid that with a big power you get big responsibility to do not overuse it, right?
It's the Spider-Man
Indeed.
of the spring release. I like that. We actually, I think, have one of our large hospitality clients is piloting this right now with our team. So I'm interested to see what they learn through that process. Are there guardrails or change management processes that you would recommend clients put in place
Sure.
before they turn this on?
I think it can be very powerful feature to enable it on your full copy sandbox. Use your full copy sandbox or any other sandbox to be more specific for making the changes, but then you follow your standard release management to make sure that you're testing it, putting in the code repository, and so on. And probably I would not even use it on the production at the end. It should go through your standard deployment process to your production environment.
Interesting. So almost treat this the way that somebody might use a Claude Code or a cursor to do a draft of logic or a draft of some kind of change, and then inspect the code and go through good SDLC processes to promote it. They should consider the same thing from an admin perspective using the full sandbox to get some productivity out of this particular feature.
That makes sense, yes.
Okay. I love that. How would you recommend, and it could be the exact same thing, but how would you recommend that someone build up their confidence within their org that it's safe to do AI configuration changes?
Hmm. There is lots of standard good practices which you can follow to make sure that your org is in a good shape. And like a simple example would be adding descriptions to your custom fields or deleting custom fields which nobody used from quite a few years. The overall idea with large language models is that if you have lots of context, so in the topic of code generation is going to be one class with thousands of lines, but it can be also a custom object with 500 fields without any description or any like meaningful information. Figuring out what you really want to do is going to be challenging. If you can clean all of the stack that, keep your org with good descriptive names and so on, that would increase the chances that LLM is going to be able to give you the results that you're asking. But I think it's quite important to keep in mind that whole topic of code generation or metadata generation by this design is not going to work perfectly. And that's a little bit related to the next item on our list, the agent scripts. If you think what Salesforce promote 2 years ago, it was like a beautiful vision that LLM is going to do everything for you. But unfortunately, LLMs are related to probability. And it means that it can be 99% correct, but there's 1%, if you are a solid company, can cost you $1 million, right? So with code generation, that's exactly why you will need to have a human reviewing it. With metadata generation, your admin will be the person making the review and decision is good enough. And with agent scripts, which is like the new feature introduced in this release, Salesforce is trying a little bit to cover this gap for agent first its own. So we are going to get a new tool to define a declarative YAM-like language to make, they don't like this word, but it's like the predictive bot, which operates similar to Einstein bots in the past. But this current generative AI is like plug and play in a specific places. So it's easier to control how it's going to execute in the specific situations. And that's a promise that probably is going to give a more realistic or more bigger confidence that it is good enough to be used by real enterprise grade software.
Mhm. It is an interesting part of the release, and I think one of the most interesting parts about it for me is it starts to address the question of flexibility, and I'll stay away from the code terms like determinism, but reliability perhaps, right? So how would you recommend that people look at agent scripts to determine the balance between being really flexible versus creating good enterprise reliability?
Hmm. I will start from thinking, is there any process which you really expect your agent to follow? If the answer is yes, and you can define this process, with high likelihood that's going to be a good direction. So just OpenLLM works perfectly when you have chat-like conversation and nothing specific in mind. But how often are you going to do it in B2B context? Probably not often if you don't want your agents to give 80% discount of your products and so on. We had these horror stories, right? So that's a quite common challenge that if you are trying to use technology as early adapter, it may happen that you will need to put extra efforts to adapt to the changes after few releases. And I believe this is exactly what is happening with Agent Force, but it's a positive change.
No, I would agree. What if you flip it a little bit and not so much take the perspective of how do you put it into the business process flows, but let's talk about the development process flows. What would be the best way to leverage this for DevOps pipelines or areas where the more technical people on the team might want to leverage it?
Mm, It's not precisely available to them because agent scripts are related to building agents inside of the Salesforce. So I would not say this particular scripts can really help for DevOps or development. But when we are thinking about more conceptual level, that's a little bit what we are already doing. So if you have a dev team following some standard process with code reviews, with making pull requests and so on, you may not even be aware if your colleague AI generated this snippet of code or implemented it on their hand because like it's just the input, but then you follow this well-defined process that another person is reviewing it. Maybe you have some automatic code scans, then someone is merging it and so on. So that's a very good analogy to Salesforce is introducing.
Got it. Okay. So it's kind of implementing that similar process, but more for the admin side, than necessarily for the development side. Is there a level of governance that those YAML scripts, should have? Or is there a way to kind of manage them as they start to expand so that we don't end up with creep on the YAML files themselves?
It's just the beginning of the journey. So we are thinking about problems which didn't occur yet. And the main reason is that it's just a beta version. As a rule of thumb, I would suggest to trying to keep it simple. So it's really focusing on job to be done, thinking what this one particular agent is really responsible for, and not trying to create one YAML for entire enterprise, but literally focus on having this granularity because that would help you avoid this headache in the future.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If we switch gears a little bit too, I know there's a bunch of security changes that are happening in this release. Are there any aspects of those security changes as a whole that you think is worth calling out or discussing?
There are two topics which are out of my mind. First, that Salesforce decided to remove session ID from Outlook messages, and I think some members of our audience may not be even aware of this feature because it's like one of the oldest things in the Salesforce ecosystem, and it was working like a charm for many years. So, like when I was preparing for my certified technical architect review board, I was still quite often recommending to use it because, like, there were no limits. All other APIs related integration platforms, even and so on, there was a risk that we will hit a wall. With onboard messages, there was nothing like that. And unfortunately, the problem was that Salesforce long time ago, in times between standards like OAuth were created, decided that the way to make these outbound messages working with SaaS systems is to send session ID. And session ID is literally the easiest way to log in as your user and do everything what you can do without real trackability. So that's a serious security risk. And the fact that they're removing it makes sense, but for sure, for lots of companies, that would require some extra development to switch to another way, like platform events, API integration, and so on, to make sure that their SaaS systems are still connected to Salesforce.
Yeah, even in my role, and I've been a business user a lot more than I've been a technical user of the platform. There have been plenty of times where session IDs have saved me. So it's there's some mixed emotion there to watch that get removed. Is this part of a larger trend for Salesforce
Yeah,
making the changes?
I think last year was quite eye-opening that the security architecture has some gaps, and Salesforce must really make some bold decisions to avoid responsibility for just keeping things insecure. And that's related to the last topic on our release. So Salesforce currently disabled in this release possibility to create connected apps. And that's, I think, the biggest call to actions because, like, looking on what is happening with the session IDs in outbound messages, fact that now we cannot anymore create a new connected app means that rather sooner than later they're going to be out of life. And that makes perfectly sense because also they are like mm, kind of backdoor to orgs of the customers who are using connected apps. So switching to external client apps which are available from quite sometimes is a very good idea. If you are Salesforce customers, that's going to be much easier. If you're App Exchange partner, it's also about change management because you not only need to create this new external client app, but you must release it to your customers. They must authorize, you must explain what's going on. So I would say, looking on how fast Salesforce started to make decisions about security, I would strongly recommend to prioritize if you are still using connected app to put it on your tech debt robust for the next quarter.
No, that's a fantastic insight as well, because yes, I know there's a ton still out there, and that is something that clients are actively going to have to manage through, whether they're an ISV partner or whether they are a direct customer of Salesforce. So, thank you for going through all of this. Are there any, you have any kind of closing thoughts or final comments before we wrap this up for this session?
The final thought is that there are still a few hundred pages of documentation, so there are probably many more features which can be interested to. Depends, are you like Revenue Cloud user, maybe field service, and so on and so on. So if you have like any specific questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll help to bring something more interesting for your perspective.
Thanks, Jakob, for that. And I know you've also been doing a lot of work with our API monitoring um, technology that we're using within Salesforce to kind of understand the flow of where people are pulling data or working with data. Um, in line with that, have you come up with anything to help clients kind of turbocharge their ability to understand, the level of health of their organization? A lot of what you described hinged on the idea that you may need to kind of clean up and make things um, a little more simple to work with. Do we have a way to help clients through that?
We have, but we don't have a product for this. We have rather consulting led engagement because, like, this org quality means different things for different people. Sometimes it's going to be more about data, sometimes more about processes, sometimes more about code. So the best option is to let some external advisor to take a look on what is there and then prepare a bespoke mitigation plan for your problems.
Fantastic. Well, we'll leave it at that then. If there is a need to kind of get under the hood and see what the recommended approach might be for your unique org, then I'm sure our team would be more than happy to help. So, thank you for taking the time today, and look forward to doing this again soon.